topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Who is January Jones? She is not a young, beautiful, talented actress on Mad Men. She is not an older, gorgeous, exotic dancer from the Johnny Carson Show. She is an author, and she wrote Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th Commandment, that reached #1 at Amazon.com. She is a reality TV golf personality with World High Stakes Golf televised on HDNet. She is a humorist and winologist expert. She is your featured host today on January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and listen to Ms. Jones with her eclectic roster of guests as you learn life's lessons. These stories plus sharing equals success. Welcome, and remember, beware, because you are entering the no whining world of January Jones.
Hello everyone. I hope you're having a terrific day. I'm January Jones, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast today. As you can see, I'm getting ready for the 4th of July with my glitter hat, glitter cane, and glitter everything. Then on the 4th of July, we'll be launching my new brand, Glitter Granny Gifts. I'll be doing that as an associate affiliate at Amazon. We'll be selling everything that glitters and glows for you to give or to get. We'll tell you more about it next week. Now let me ask you a question. Do you remember the golden age of television? Yes, that's when we were growing up. Tell me, did you have your own special favorite show, the one you liked the best? We all did. We had so many shows. As you know, last week we talked about I Love Lucy. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorites, the Bob Hope shows. Do you remember how his USO tours would be televised after he'd go to the military bases during the highlights? Yes, at one time he visited the USS Bennington when my husband was on the ship serving in Vietnam. Now, do you know that the Bob Hope channel has just launched on YouTube? Isn't that exciting? If you can answer yes or maybe to any of these questions, then you are in the right place. And I'd like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Now it's time, rest, relax, go get some wine, get some cheese and crackers, and sit down and enter the no wine zone with us. Today, I want to tell you about my guest. My guest represents the Bob Hope legacy, the Bob Hope and Dolores Hope Foundation, and the Hope family. They are proud to announce the new Bob Hope channel on YouTube. My guest has for years handled the licensings of these materials, issues pertaining to copyright, and maintaining the extensive archives. In 1986, he just filled in for a summer job at Bob Hope Enterprises as a production assistant. He never returned to his old job, and 38 years later, he is still there. Our guest has worked on 43 television shows with Bob or about Bob, and countless personal appearances. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Jim Hardy. Hi, Jim.
Hi, January. Happy to be with you today.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. I've been looking forward to this. 38 years, that's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a long time. Couldn't ask for a better stroke of luck, right place at the right time, January.
Good. Yeah, that counts in everything, not just show business. Before we talk about the Bob Hope channel, I'm very excited about that. Share with our listeners a little bit of your success story, where you started out and who your early influences were, and how you got into entertainment.
Well, I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be in the entertainment industry, probably from the time I was about 10. Myself and the neighborhood kids, one of the neighbors had a little 8mm camera, and we used to shoot little movies and animate things. And I knew that this was the direction that I wanted to go. And I pursued that vigorously, went to school, learned film and television production. So I had a degree when the opportunity came along for that 3-month gig. So for the Hope people, it was a plug and play situation. They didn't have to teach me anything. And they had a show to do that summer, which was not always the case. And that's kind of really why they needed somebody to fill in for this fellow that had to take the summer off. And he was my Wally Pip. I got his spot on the roster, and I never gave it up.
Good for you. Where were you born? What part of the country are you from?
I was actually born in Berkeley, just up the coast here, but I grew up in Denver and spent my whole life really in Denver until I went to college in Oklahoma.
Okay.
After I graduated from OU, I came straight out here to find my way in the entertainment business.
Was this your first big job, getting hired with Bob Hope Enterprises? Yeah,
I had worked on a couple of shows here or there, and it was freelance type stuff. It was nothing permanent, and you'd work a Tuesday here and a Saturday there and so forth. And when this came along, it was steady work for 3 months. And I thought, well, shoot, if nothing else, I'll get an opportunity to meet an awful lot of important people. And, see if it leads to something. And and the most important person that I met during that 3 months was Bob, and it led to a 38-year gig.
Okay. And I love the part that you're still there. That's wonderful.
Still there. Yeah. I changed the locks. What can they do?
Yeah, I'm sure you're very valuable to them with all your experience. Share a little bit before we talk about the shows and the USO and the entertainment and people, celebrity after celebrity. Share a little bit about how Bob actually got started in show business. Was he born in the UK or was he born in this country?
He was born in the UK. He was born in a little suburb of London called Eltham.
Okay.
But came here when he was 4 years old and grew up in Cleveland and had an interest in show business. He liked to perform. He liked the attention. His mother could see that in him. He had a lot of brothers, but she could see that, and she would take him to the local vaudeville house and so forth to see entertainment. And she encouraged him, and he was very interested in it and took dancing lessons and so forth. He was a little bit of a delinquent, in minor offenses, spent some time in reform school and was a bit of a pool hustler and so forth.
Wow, I have never heard about that part.
Yeah, like a lot of kids, nothing serious, but, he could have gone off the rails a little bit. But he took dancing lessons, and then he became a dancer, went out on the road with various partners in vaudeville with limited success, and really found his niche when he was asked by one of the theater managers if he could just, when you're done with your dancing act, just introduce the next act, which was a Scottish fella. And so Bob introduced him and did a couple of Scottish jokes, which I guess were popular in those times, about Scottish people being cheap, I guess. And got a couple of laughs out of it. And so each day, he'd add another joke, and he'd add another joke. And he was doing really well. And, the manager finally came to him and said, that's what you should be doing. I'd give up the dancing part, and I would pursue this is where your talent is. And so he did. So he made an effort then to become a comic, and still struggled. He toiled in vaudeville for years, really. It was no overnight success by any means, and was very close to giving it up and going back to Cleveland and going to work for his brother in a butcher shop. He was cold and hungry in Chicago, and you talked about being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, we did.
A friend of his from Cleveland was walking past and said, "Bob, what are you doing, Bob?" And he said, I can't get steady work. I'm really struggling. He said, "Hey, come on upstairs with me. I'm going to see my booking agent." And the agent needed somebody to be an MC for just 3 days.
Okay.
He said, so he gave the gig to Bob. He said, it's a 3-day, it's 3 days at the Stratford Hotel. And he stayed there 6 months. It just clicked.
Okay.
Found his audience, and they found him, and he never looked back from there. But, if he wasn't standing on that street corner on that evening, we might not be having this conversation here today. He might be, the most famous butcher in Cleveland, for all we know. So,
his brother had a butcher shop, right?
Yeah, a very successful butcher shop, and he thought, look, I've given this every chance, and it's not happening, and maybe it's just not going to happen. All the talent in the world, the work ethic, nobody worked harder than Bob did, but sometimes you still need that little break, and he got it, and he never looked back after that.
And it's interesting that he started out as an MC, because I remember so many years where he would be the host of the Oscars. Yeah. And some of the times, actually, when I was younger, I did get to see him perform. And it was just the way he strolled out and presented himself. Everyone was laughing in anticipation of what they knew was coming. And it was always going to be wonderful.
Yeah, he was really born to it, wasn't he, Jake?
Yeah.
He was so natural. He was so comfortable with it. And it showed. He just dripped confidence.
For sure. Well, we're going to take a break here. And if you know someone who's a whiner, or if you're a whiner, this is the perfect gift to give or get.
Lately, there's a whining epidemic in our world. People are even whining about whining. Are you sick and tired of listening to everyone whining all the time? So was January Jones, the author of Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment that reached #1 at Amazon.com. Ms. Jones based her book on a survey of the top 10 things that people whine about at all ages and all stages of life. January is a success coach that can tell you how to help others. When you buy Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment, you'll find out what people whine about and how to stop them from whining. This is the perfect gift book to give or get for any occasion. Thou Shalt Not Whine was voted the best gift to be given anonymously for those special people in your life. Ms. Jones is an internationally known author in the style of Irma Bombeck, specializing in housewife humor, with her book being published in Korea and China. You can find Thou Shalt Not Whine at Amazon.com.
Welcome back to the No Whine Zone with my guest, Jim Hardy. He is not a whiner because he is a winner, and he is here to promote the Bob Hope YouTube channel. So if you're watching this show on my YouTube channel, all you need to do is switch over and check in with Bob's show and then subscribe. And be sure you're subscribed with me too. Let's talk about some of the famous people that he worked with and you got to meet. Who would you say was the most memorable guest or person, celebrity?
Oh boy, that's a tall order. I'll tell you, one of the most memorable for me was a lot of young fellas like myself growing up drooled over Barbara Eaton.
Oh yeah, Jeannie.
Yeah, and so 8 years later, there she is, and she's on the show, and I'm meeting Barbara Eaton, and I couldn't put two words together, January. you play it all out in your head. You're going to be so cool. And, the reality is that it doesn't matter how old we are. When you're around a Barbara Eaton, we're all just pimple-faced little boys. And I couldn't put two words together. It was so memorable for me to meet her. She was so charming and sweet and beautiful. Such a nice person and a great talent. But I also met, I got to meet Lucy. I got to meet George Burns, Milton Berle, Danny Thomas. I mean, just legendary people.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, a lot of pinch me moments, if you want to call them that, because it's just, when I look back on it, I still am amazed at the life that I was privileged to share there with Bob, because he knew everybody, had them on the show, and they were just so delightful. January, just the nicest people, and because I think that comes from that generation.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to become a star in those days.
Yes.
Going through vaudeville and trying to get on radio and so forth. Now there are so many conduits to get attention. And it was hard to become a star and to accomplish something in entertainment. And those that did had such an appreciation for it, for the life that they had, for the career that they had. And it showed, and they treated people very, very well. And they appreciated everybody on the crew because they knew that was part of what made them successful. They appreciated their fans because without them, they would not have the career and the life that they had. And I don't know that exists so much today. I found that entertainers from that generation were very kind to everybody and really were grateful. And, you get a sense now that today people gets a sense of entitlement, and I think it's very refreshing, and I think that people today could learn some lessons from that, because you get a lot more out of your cast and crew when you're kind to them.
I think it's so true what you're saying and commenting on. And the interesting thing is that generation had so much respect for the entertainment industry, and consequently, they received respect back. And they were courteous, coming and going to fans, to coworkers, and it was such an wonderful atmosphere to work in. Go through what a production assistant actually does, because I know you're supposed to get the coffee. But then after you get the coffee, there must be a few other things that they have you do, don't they?
Yeah, there were a lot of things that you're helping the producer, who at the time was a fellow named Elliot Kozak. You're helping the associate producer, Silk Aaron Keeney, who had spent 39 years at NBC doing the Bob Hope shows before he went to work for Bob directly. Just a wealth of knowledge. You're kind of you're the person that kind of pitches in whenever somebody needs something. And part of the job was going over to Bob's house and running tape for him, because the shows were on tape in those days. Mm-hmm. And he had a setup there adjacent to his suite, his bedroom suite. And that's where all the machines were. And you would run tape for him. And so you had an opportunity to just be the only other person sitting in the room with him. And you got to bond with him very quickly, because, he's talking to you about the show. He's asking your opinion about things, which was interesting. Why would he care about what my opinion was? But there were jokes that he thought were going to be killer, when he read them on the page, and they were flat when he told them. And, he would ask you, what do you think happened there? Or why was this joke so big and this one flopped and so on? And he was interested in your opinion. And in as much as I knew it was a temporary job, I thought, well, I have no reason to not tell him the truth.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if it was a permanent job, I probably would have been guessing like everybody else. What does he want to hear?
Oh, and yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just told him, that joke do well because it's just not very funny. You know, it just wasn't, I didn't think it was funny, and I guess a lot of other people didn't think. And he appreciated that, you know, that he didn't always agree with you, but he appreciated that if he asked you a question, he was going to get an honest answer. And sometimes he agreed, and sometimes he didn't. But that counted for him, and you know, so it was my good fortune, I guess, that it was a temporary job, and I just went with it.
Oh, wow. And I'm sure he looked at you as the typical honest audience. And as you said earlier, people who were valuing their jobs were trying to figure out what he wanted to hear. So it must have really been refreshing to have this young kid around.
Yeah, I guess that's, you know, part of the problem of being celebrity or being, you know, a CEO or whatever is people are just trying to tell you what you want to hear, and that's not what you ask. You know?
Yeah.
And I was 25 years old. I didn't have anything to lose, and you know, and I was speaking for a generation, a lot of which, you know, were in the audience, and so, you know, I could give him a perspective that maybe he didn't have on his own.
Tell me, I'm always curious, since I am a writer, how many writers worked for him? I mean, he was just coming up with joke after joke after joke. So there must have been a really good support system on that show.
Yeah, he had a lot of writers. He had, you know, 8 to 10 writers at any one time.
Wow. Yeah.
He was obviously very funny on his own. You know, he wouldn't have been successful. But when he got into radio, his first big break, and you know, the show went on the air, and when the show was over, he realized everybody's heard it. I need a new show in 7 days, because in Vaudeville you could do the same show for a year because you just travel around, and then he had to get writers, and he always had young, good, smart guys out of college, and you know, and that served him very well, and he loved the writers, and they were very, very valuable to him. He was a great editor, and every writer wrote a whole show, and then he would cobble the show together, taking different bits and pieces from all the different writers and puzzling it together, the best parts. And he was very good at it. And I remember a funny story is that when he had a new writer, it was brand new, and the guy came over to drop off, you know, his first stuff. Bob was just driving out, and he handed it to Bob through the window of the car, this manila envelope, and Bob didn't even open it. He just felt it. It was heavy. He said, "Oh yeah, this is good. This is good." He knew it was that much material from a smart guy. There was going to be some gold in there, you know.
Whoa,
and he was going to find it. He was going to find it.
Now, did Bob, did he make the decisions on which jokes he was going to use, or did he get input? Or did his wife give him input? Was she part of the equation?
She was not part of the production equation, although he would do the monologue, especially in radio. Linda tells the story, being that she was the oldest daughter, that he would do the monologue at the dinner table, you know, before he went off then to do the show, you know. And didn't always get a very good reception. And in the middle of it, you know, he's telling jokes, and in the middle of it, Dolores will say, "Kelly, sit up." You know? He said, "Boy, talk about a tough audience." You know? But no, she didn't have any input into what he would use. He would go through. He was the last word on everything. He was absolutely the last word on everything. He had his fingers in every piece of the pie. And the show that went on the air, it was his show top to bottom.
100%, right. Yeah, I remember I used to live in California, and his family, they were in Toluca Lake, very active and very philanthropy, and they were doing so much for charity right from the beginning. You know, we're going to take a break, and 60 years later, we're still asking, who killed Kennedy?
Let me ask you a question. Are you still wondering who killed Kennedy? Over 50 years later, the assassination is still a mystery. It is unfinished business for our country. Now, get ready for a theory that you've never heard before, but will make more sense than any other conspiracy theory that you've ever heard in the past. January Jones speaks the unspeakable in her book, Jackie, Ari, and Jack, The Tragic Love Triangle, connecting Jackie and Aristotle Onassis romantically prior to JFK's assassination. Did you know that Ari was Jackie's guest in the White House during the JFK funeral? He was the only non-family member who was invited by Jackie to stay there during the funeral. Aristotle Onassis was one of the wealthiest men in the world, with the means, the motive, and the money to order an assassination that was the perfect crime of the last century. Ari needed class, and Jackie needed cash. They were perfect for each other. Now, what is Camelot? It is but another tragic love triangle. Jackie, Ari, and Jack is available at JanuaryJones.com, Amazon.com, and audiobooks.com, read by Ms. Jones.
Welcome back with our guest today, Jim Hardy, who is an archivist with the Bob Hope Foundation. And let's talk a little bit. I mentioned in the opening that my husband had been in the Navy on the USS Bennington, and then Bob Hope's troop visited his ship. That was way back in 1966. And Joey Heatherton was with him, and all the sailors, they just went nuts. They were so happy. My husband sent me home, the little 8mm film, and you could see everyone just so excited. Did you go on all these trips, or how did that play out for you?
Well, those were before my time, but I did have an opportunity to go to the Persian Gulf, to Beirut, to Desert Storm, Moscow and Berlin after the fall of the wall, and to visit troops and state personnel over there. So I had an opportunity to go on some of these shows, and it's a very unique experience. The travel is arduous because you're on C-130s typically, which are very cold and loud and not that fast. It's a long trip. But the incredible thing about that, Desert Storm in particular, which is the last troop show that we did, he was 87 years old, Bob, and he was just the most spry, energetic person out there.
Oh,
he was so energized by being able to interact with the troops and to entertain them. It meant so much to him. It was a rapport and a bond between soldier and entertainer that was like no other. And he'd been doing it at that time. He had been doing it for 50 years already.
How many years did he entertain the troops for? And I know most of those trips were during the holidays too, weren't they?
Yeah, a lot of those shows were Christmas shows. Yeah, certainly when you looked at it, always Christmas shows.
Yeah. And how many years did he do that? Do you recall?
He started entertaining troops in 1941, and the last trip that he did was 1990, Christmas at 1990. So that's 49 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when you take the show on the road, like how many people would be in your traveling? How many people would you be traveling with? And cameras, and you have to take all of that, right?
Yeah, you have to take everything with you. Your cameras, your lights, all the personnel, your cast, your writers, your director. Depending on how big the cast is, you can have 40 or 50 people on this trip, and a lot of equipment. So logistically, it's quite an undertaking.
Yeah, and it was especially very meaningful to military wives, children, mothers, that these Christmas shows would be broadcast. and everyone in the family, we all got together, and you're watching the show and hoping you might see your sailor, your soldier. And it was so wonderful because those were the days where you couldn't just pick up a phone and call someone. We sent tapes back and forth, and it would sometimes take 2 to 3 weeks to get a letter or a tape. So those shows were just so good for morale, weren't they?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think people today don't realize how difficult communications were, especially at such distances. It's not an easy thing to keep in touch with your friends and family when you were half a world away, not like today. So yeah, it was valuable. And interestingly, a lot of the service people would get, they would put a matchbook or something in his hand with a phone number and a name on it. So when you get back, would you call my mom, or would you call my wife, tell her that you saw me and I'm okay, and stuff like that. And he would come back and he would spend days up in his room on the phone, and he would make these calls. So, imagine getting a call like that and the personal touch. But, he understood the importance of it and the value of it. And, there's a great story from World War II when it was really, letters could take months, to get from the South, back to home. And, Bob got a letter one day from a woman, Harriet Peterson. I'll never forget her name. And she wrote to him. The last letter that she received from her husband was him talking about having seen Bob's show, that they came and performed for them on some island in the South Pacific. And between the time that he wrote that letter and between the time that she got that letter, months later, she buried him. He was killed in action and returned home, and she had buried him. And she gets the letter, and he was so full of humor and life in this letter, talking about these things. And she wrote to Bob, just to tell him how important it was what he had done and for everybody else. And it's a very powerful reminder of just how important it is what he did and what he was doing. So I think that if he were alive today, he would say, without question, it was the most important thing that he did in his life.
Yeah. And I know for these holidays, he was away from his family. And then I suppose when he came back, they would have to catch up. But I do remember watching some of the shows where his wife and children went with him on the trips. And that was always fun because Dolores had such a beautiful singing voice.
Yeah, that's how we met her. Yeah, she was a singer.
Oh, really?
She was a singer at a place called the Vogue Club. And George Murphy, who later became a senator, was on Broadway with Bob in a show called Roberta. And he took Bob over to the Vogue Club one night after the show. And out she came and sang Paper Moon and some other things, and Bob was smitten right away. She was a marvelous singer, a great talent.
Yes.
But yeah, she did. She went on a couple of shows. But Linda tells the story. That when they were kids, they didn't understand how come Dad's never home for Christmas. And she told them why he was gone and what he was doing, and she said there's an awful lot of kids out there that don't have their dads for Christmas either, and your dad is over, making their Christmases a little better. And when they grew up, they understood it, but she had a great appreciation for what he was doing, and then by extension, then the kids learned how important it was too, and they would have their Christmas when he got back.
Yeah. Well, that's what you do when you're in the military, and they were almost just like the military. I remember reading somewhere that he actually got into doing the entertainment for the troops because President Roosevelt personally called him in and requested that this service be done. And apparently just everyone in Hollywood, they were all in to help him put these shows together, weren't they?
Yeah, Hollywood really banded together and did a lot of great entertainment efforts for soldiers. Because it's a war that everybody was into.
Yeah.
There was no, you were not on the fence about that. Because it was not a controversial war. I mean, we were all in, and Hollywood really did a great job of entertaining personnel. And Bob was going to, he wanted to enlist. And Roosevelt said, no, come on. You can do so much more good entertaining. And so he did. And boy, tirelessly, and made those trips over there. Those were hard trips. Island hopping in 1944 on those little planes that they were flying around in. An awful lot could go wrong. He's lucky he got out of all of this stuff unscathed.
And I know he used to talk about some of the flights and with these Army military planes. Definitely, it was not luxurious, was it?
No, it was not luxurious. Sometimes you're sleeping on top of pallets.
Yeah.
They were not. It was not commercial aircraft. Those were aircraft for moving troops and moving cargo and moving equipment. And they were slow, and they had to stop and refuel, and they were cold, and that's how you got there. And there was no other way to do it. There were some mishaps here and there, an engine failure. They had to ditch on a lake in Australia.
Oh, wow.
Flying a plane that had no wheels. It was a PBY, which takes off and lands from water. But they were flying over land, and the engine went out, and they were going down. And fortunately, the pilot he found a body of water that was big enough to accommodate this plane, and he got there. And
safe landing.
One of the few close calls.
I bet there were others too. Right now we're going to hear about some people who have been guests on this podcast who are priceless personalities. Have you ever met someone who was unforgettable? Someone who has touched your heart and soul? People who have faced difficult problems? People who have struggled to find solutions? People who fearlessly shared their stories? People who have not only informed you, but inspired you. People who have priceless personalities. I have been fortunate to host an internet radio talk show called January Jones Sharing Success Stories, and it has been my privilege to interview hundreds of guests. My guests have shared their stories, their struggles, their secrets, and their successes in their own words. In this book, we're talking about people dealing with problems such as incest, molestation, runaway kids, child abuse, drug abuse, polygamy, unemployment, scandal, and starting over. Then there are my guests dealing with difficult physical struggles such as blindness, cancer, and birth defects that are beyond traumatic. My guests have all been exciting, eclectic, and energizing. They have amazed, amused, and even astonished me. I have adored getting to meet them, and I adore sharing them with you.
Attention all listeners. Priceless Personalities, Success Stories Shared by January Jones, Volume 2 is now available at Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle editions. You'll be able to meet 10 amazing people who will be sharing their own personal stories with all their struggles, successes, and solutions, sprinkled with lots of humor and hope. Priceless Personalities features a teenager who becomes one of the famous Supremes from Motown, a nurse who as a humorist helps people to heal, an inspiring laughter yoga instructor, a mother dealing with the loss of a child, an incredible motivational speaker, a woman who married 5 times, a gifted paranormal nurse, a wise economist, a funny female humorist, along with an older man sharing his sweet childhood in the Deep South. January's guests are all amazing and amusing. You will never forget meeting them. Go to Amazon.com for your own priceless experience.
Welcome back with Jim Hardy, who is working with the Bob and Dolores Foundation, and they've established a Bob Hopechannel on YouTube that I hope you will check out and subscribe to. Let's talk a little bit about the road shows. Those were so amazing, so entertaining. Were you involved in any of that, and how many did he do?
Well, he did 7 road pictures. Those
Okay.
were before my time.
Mm-hmm.
The chemistry between he and Bing in particular was just magical, and really has never been duplicated by any other duo. I know they've tried.
Yeah.
They actually had met each other at the Capitol Theater in 1932 when they were both the vaudeville headliners. Bob was the MC of the show. Bing was a big-time singing star already.
Mm-hmm.
And they just they made a quick and fast friendship. They were doing 5 shows a day, and to break up the monotony, they started to do some shtick and come up with some little comedy routines that they would do before he would go on then and sing his song. And they just were just real pals. They just liked each other. So later, when they're both at Paramount, and the idea for Road to Singapore comes along, which was actually written for George Burns.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
Some of the producers saw Bob and Bing together, and Bing was involved with the Del Mar racetrack down near San Diego. And every would open the season, Bob would go down, and they did. He'd call them up on stage, and the two of them would do some of the stuff that they had done, 8 years earlier. But the producers thought that they were meeting each other like for the first time, and they thought, "Wow, these two were just magic." And so they put them together in that movie, and the rest is history because it was just such a huge success. And they were just so great at, they ad-libbed an awful lot of that January. There's a lot of stuff that is in those movies that they just dreamed up themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet, that's the original improv, probably, when those two got together with so much talent going back and forth. And I also I seem to recall that they both were fanatical golfers, right?
Oh, yeah. Big time. Loved golf. But the funny story that Bob tells is that in the beginning, Bing was the real star. If you look at the credits on that first one, it's Bing Crosby in big letters, Dorothy Lamour in big letters, and Bob Hope. And, when the weather was good, and Bob, he would then call Bing and say, Bing had to call in sick. If the weather was good and they wanted to go out and play golf, Bob didn't have the credentials to pull that off. Bing would call in and say he had a sore throat or whatever, and then they'd go out and play golf. he needed Bing for that. Bing was the celebrity. He was the big star.
Yeah. Oh gosh, those shows were great. And then Bob, I know he got involved in having his own golf tournament, and I know Bing had his thing up at Pebble Beach. And all the celebrities, they were just thrilled to get invited to their tournaments. Was incredible for people, wasn't it?
Yeah. Both of those, the clam bake up at the AT&T, that was the Bing Crosby. And then the Desert Classic down in Palm Springs, that was Bob's tournament. And they were both pro-ams for the first 2 days.
Yeah.
It's a lot of celebrities or sports stars and so forth playing golf with the pros for fun. And it raised money for charity, which is really why he started to do the tournament in the beginning.
Yeah.
And they built the Eisenhower Medical Center with the money that they made from those tournaments. And those tournaments
amazing
for decades, and just so entertaining. And and the pros had a lot of fun because they're getting to meet people that they admire. They're meeting Clint Eastwood, Sammy Davis Jr. So it was fun. In both ways. The stars are getting to meet the pro golfers that they love and admire, and it worked the other way around as well.
Oh yeah,
had a lot of fun doing it. It still goes on today, but it doesn't wear Bob's name anymore.
Yeah, I remember when we were much younger. We were in California, as I said, and we got to go down to the desert and go to walk one of the tournaments. And you couldn't believe there were celebrities coming and going. And he had both he and Bing, they both had such a relaxed demeanor. I mean, they were so easy to be around. People just loved them so much.
Yeah, they were very accommodating. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet Dave. He didn't live long enough for me to meet him. But everything that you see, you're right. He and Bob have that. They're just so comfortable with themselves and with the people. There's no environment that is foreign to them, and people gravitate to that because they're accessible. They don't push you away. They're friendly. They'll shake your hand. They talk to them. They joke with them, and
they were signing autographs, and they were just so delightful. And so I'm looking at the notes here for the show, and what a patriot. He had 6 decades where he went to, whether we were at war or at peace, he would go on. He did 57 USO tours, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, where my husband saw him, and the Persian Gulf. And what an amazing American. I remember George Burns lived to be 100. Did Bob Hope also do that?
Yeah, he did.
Oh,
he was 100 and a couple of months. Yeah.
So that's amazing. What a wonderful goal. And I know when he passed, the whole world was in mourning. It was like a light had gone out in our world.
Well, I think any senior, anybody really, but seniors in particular, can learn a lot from Bob and how he lived his life. He took very good care of himself. He was careful about what he ate. He walked a lot. Every night, didn't matter where he was after dinner, he would take a walk. He was so positive. And as you talk about no whining. Bob Hope's house and the studio or wherever he was a no whining zone. He was not a whiner and wouldn't tolerate it. And there's always hiccups in life. Things do not always go as planned. But he met the challenges with humor and with a positive attitude, and he rolled up his sleeves and got to it. And his attitude was we'll figure it out. And, the only way to figure it out is to just get started. Okay, let's get started on it. And if we're wrong, then we'll fix it and we'll go a different direction. But never just sat down and like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
He was in attack mode all the time and whistling and humming to himself. He was always in a good mood. There was no dark side that a lot of comedians have. He didn't have that. He was
that's lovely to hear. And he was a big part of the greatest generation. And it's just so fabulous to go back and look through history at all of their contributions. That whole and you're right. There was no whining in that group.
You just get to it.
Sure. Well, it's time to end, and I'm so happy you created the Bob Hope channel, and I hope our listeners will check it out. I hope our listeners have enjoyed our time together. My upcoming guests will all be eclectic, just like Jim was today. Now, the important thing to remember here is that we do not want any whining. We want just smiling. Thank you for entering the no whine zone. Stop whining, start smiling. And if that doesn't work, then you can just start eating chocolate. Lots and lots of chocolate. Again, thank you, Jim Hardy, and I hope you come back to visit us again.
Thank you, January, for having me on and letting me talk about my favorite comedian.
Mine too. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
We want to thank you for listening to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Always remember Ms. Jones' personal mantra, if you can think it, you can do it. That's what all of our guests have done with their lives, and so can you. You are the ultimate success coach in your own life. All you need to do will be to start sharing your own story with your family and friends. We hope that our guest stories will encourage you to explore an equation in your future that will combine your creativity plus connecting with others will enable you to be successful too. Always remember, your passion plus your purpose will equal prosperity as you explore the wonderful world of January Jones.